All right. Well, first, Frame looks at atheism, and atheism, noted earlier, is also helpful to view the dynamics of unbelief from the perspective of a more biblical categories. And he points out both either atheism or idolatry are kind of the two irrationalist worldviews here in contention.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying atheism can either be practical or theoretical or both is what he posits here.
And so what he does here now is he pivots from the discussion of rationalism, irrationalism, which is kind of a secular way to talk about what he says, to what he has called the biblical way of talking about what he's talking about here, atheism and idolatry. Right. So he's talking about the same two issues, rationalism, irrationalism, but now he's doing biblical language to help us to understand it from a biblical perspective. So it's atheism and idolatry. He's going to say, atheism is attempts to act rationalism, idolatry, irrational, that kind of stuff. But we'll see it as he goes. But that's what he does here. So he pivots from this discussion of rationalism, irrationalism, to now atheism and idolatry.
Right. Which you always have to give Frame credit that he always wants to bring it back to the Bible like a good Christian. And that's what we're asking everybody on the playing field to do, is to believe in the system that you believe in and then present the ideas under your system so that all systems can be looked at, both an internal critique, and then we find the ones that are wanting, and then we try to convince them through the external critique there. Well, the theoretical atheist denies God, but the practical atheist simply lives as though God did not exist. And he said he includes atheism under various forms of deism and theism, in which there is some kind of God who, because of his transcendence, modesty, or whatever, has nothing to do with human life. So the blind watchmaker, winds up the watch, sets it in the universe, and then walks off stage right, and is never seen from again. So that's the type of deism that I think most people kind of think of there.
Yeah, he wanders off stage right because he's blind, so he's not really sure. He's not going to walk really fast.
Right. He didn't fall off the stage, so there's that. Well, he says the natural result of atheism is a loss of standards and values. We saw earlier that they can be revealed and enforced only by the God of Scripture. And again, he's going to refer back to earlier in the books. We're going to refer back to earlier episodes.
Right. So that's atheism, right? On the other hand, is idolatry. He says this is the other major form of unbelief, namely giving one's ultimate allegiance to something or some being other than God, the God of Scripture. This allegiance might be, he tells us, to some primitive god or gods like Zeus or Baal or Moloch or whatever, to some abstract principles, for instance, Plato's The Good, to a non-Christian religion, Buddhism, even to a modern cultural movement such as the New Age, or maybe to oneself or to human reason or whatever, he says. So all of these are forms of idolatry is what he wants us to see. It's an allegiance, an ultimate allegiance to something other than the God of Scriptures.
Right. And again, he's categorizing, which means there's definitions in place, which means we have a firmer grasp on what at least Frame is talking about. And from there, we can have a better critique or understanding of where he's coming from. Well, the total loss of meaning implicit in atheism is too much for most people to stand. They need some values, some standards, some way to orient their lives.
Right. And so that's why he says then that we move to idolatry, right? Because atheism is too empty and we can't really live off of it. Right? We need some values. We need some way to orient our lives. And so we can't just stick with atheism, right? And so his point is, so being humans, actually, made in the image of God, we have to have some way to ground ourselves. And so we move on to idolatry. Right.
And again, he's going to, he maybe implicitly references Romans 1 here. And it's something that we've talked about before of, there's no one who does not worship There's something that's placed on the pedestal, that's looked to, that's idealized, that is the standard, even if it's a mirror, even if it's another person. There's still rules by which people worship, and the former 3 years have not shirked that off in any claims whatsoever. It's probably only bolstered the fact even more. Well, among these people who continue to resist a belief in the true God becomes inconsistent with their atheism, or to that extent, they become idolaters. They don't want the true God. They must seek some other.
And so he says atheism and idolatry are the only alternatives to Christianity. Now, in order to reject Christianity, one must either deny all gods or select some God to worship other than the God of Scripture. In reality, he tells us that they together form a single alternative. For even the atheist must practically allow for some absolute, and it's usually the atheist's own reason.
Right. Right. I always critique this when, especially in modern and I don't know, I'm not sure when you would put the timeline on it, but as postmodern sci-fi, there's always this want to pull things out of our world and put it into a new world, but you're still talking to the reader, and there's a way to reference the reader that you can't say, well, then the blueberry turned into a muffin, and so you're like, well, is it magic? No, that's just what had happened. Well, I don't have any conceptualization of that. Like I can imagine that, but to me, that's just imagine. There's something tied to that as a cause and effect. Even the magic spell is cast, and then the blueberry turns into the muffin. Well, you're still referencing a rationalistic world by even writing fiction. And so Superman can fly because he's alien. Okay, well, I'll grant you that, but then if you try to explain to me how he flies, you have to reference me in the real world in order to make the system, unless you're going to there's an effect, or there's a cause to that effect. And so it's not enough just to say, well, we throw off everything and that's how we live. But even then, like you're still a rational being that is going to try to convince me, or try to convince yourself that that's the way to do things. And there's the rational process of that. It could be irrational. And so, I always think of praxeology in Austrian economics. It's the point of saying that people move and cause economic factors. It's not to say that people, like chess moves, are thinking of everything. They might think, oh, I want those 10 candy bars right now, and so I want to pay the $10 rather than not have those candy bars. But there's still an action. There's still rational thought that occurs. It couldn't be improper irrational thought, or not good health or money management rational thought, but there's still rationality that takes place. And so that's what Frame is referencing here, is that there still needs to be some absolute that's in place. And so where the atheist, or atheist too broad a term, then select your own, there has to be some reason for somebody to believe and live in the way that they do, or you tend to come out the Camus way and start thinking about self-harm. So we're not wanting to do that here.
Yeah.
Well, epistemologically, idolatry tends to be less relativistic than atheism. Indeed, idolatry accounts for the same for the rather dogmatic certainty that accompanies much unbelief. Consider the amazing certainty that many people have concerning the theory of evolution. At a time when theory has been subject to serious challenges, not only by Christians, but also by some secular scientists and logicians, why are they so certain and so determined to keep out of the school any discussion of its only significant alternative, which is creation, or at least intelligent design? I was listening to a good interview by a sci-fi author, Robert J. Sawyer, very atheistic, and I've thought about critiquing that interview because on one end he says, I don't believe anything that I can't look at my bookshelf and see. So, if you tell me there's a cat up there, I'm more likely to believe. But if you tell me there's a dragon, I need to see it. But then he goes, but if you tell me that I live in a world where we're living in a simulation, well, okay, then I can start to believe that. So an all perfect being who created everything, that's outside the realm of possibility where you have to see it. But, we're living in some type of matrix is okay, that or nothing happened. But he makes a good point of saying that a lot of people, when intelligent design came into the foyer of talking, they wanted to equate it with us crazy young Earth creationists. And so not even intelligent design gets a place at the table, even though you have really good people like Michael Behe and others sitting at that table wanting to talk about it. And so it seems to be more of a for power issue than it is for alternative. And so he made a really good point in that video, which I always appreciate even atheists doing. Well, here the answer is that evolution has become for many a religious presupposition, an idol. It's the explanation for everything. Why do we like scary movies? Well, because your ancestors somehow had a gene that told them to jump at the snake in the grass. And so because your ancestors were able to survive, you had that gene. Now, why don't we have genes that tell us 2 + 2 = 4? Why do I have to go to school for that? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just evolve in a way that we just learn and then pass on our learning to our children? I think that's more beneficial, but I guess that's not what evolution had in mind. Oh, darn. Well, it becomes the idol. To lose that idol would, for many, to lose the fundamental worldview, the framework on which they rely for order and rationality. One of the reasons why Darwin got more popular as he did, and why people like Gould would come out and more atheistic people would put his ideas forward, because they needed to supplant. And it's not just, well, we do away with Christianity and everything's laid bare to us, and now we can have hedonistic lifestyle, or we can live at peace because all the crazy kooks are not now rationalistic like us. No, it's an idea that needs to be, well, we need to give the people something, or they won't continue to work, or they won't value life. So we need another opiate of the masses to convince people to do good. And again, well, you just need a God to tell you not to murder. Well, it seems to be, if we don't have a God, then a lot of other bad things seem to be happening. So I think the proof is in the pudding there.
Yeah. And so what he does next is, real briefly, he gives us 3 or 4 reasons on why he rejects the theory of evolution, right? Or at least the theory that this idea of macroevolution. He says, for instance, in Genesis 2:7, it's a special act of God in breathing that makes Adam a living creature. God did not take an already existing living creature and make him specifically human, as in theistic evolution. Rather, he took dust and gave it life. So, Adam hadn't evolved to a certain extent and then all of a sudden became a person. No, God breathed into him and he became a living creature, person. And so that's his first take, right? Genesis 2:7.
And he goes on and says that in places like Genesis 1 and following, that the frequent repetition of according to their kinds indicates that there are divinely imposed limitations on what can result from reproductions. A cat can only produce a cat. It doesn't suddenly produce a lizard, no matter how many times it has eggs. That might be opposite, but still, he says that he does not know broadly these kinds should be constructed, or how they relate to modern biological classifications as such as family, genus, and species. But whatever a kind is, these passages evidently imply that plants and animals of one kind do not produce plants or animals of another. But that is what must happen in the theory of evolution to be true. We started out as banana plants, and then we grew into ficuses, and because it has more chromosomes than we do. But again, when we have more chromosomes than we do, bad things tend to happen there as well. So it seems like these chromosomes need to change us, but not too much.
He goes on to say that although he's not well equipped to judge scientific evidence, that He'll simply add that as a layman, he's not convinced by the evidence presented to him for evolution. He says, doubtless there has been what is sometimes called microevolution, right? Variations in the distribution of genetic characteristics within a species due to natural selection, right? Like colored moths and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And he uses this, right? He says, in some environments, moths of a certain color become more predominant. And in other environments, those of a different color, its color proves in different ways to be an aid to survival and reproduction. So that's kind of a micro change in terms of moth. But he says this amounts to variation within already existing genetic possibilities rather than a process that produces a whole new species, right? And which requires a whole new set of genetic possibilities. And he doesn't see the evidence for that happening.
Right. Right. We say that Jesus is coming back, and they go, well, where is he? Well, we just need time. And then we go, I want to see a bird turn into a dog. Like, well, you can't do that right now. All you need is just a little bit of time. So there we go. We're all waiting. He goes on to say further, I agree with Philip Johnson that the real persuasive power of the theory of evolution is not the evidence adduced in the favor, but rather the fact that it is only viable alternative to theism. Indeed, evolution is necessary once one rejects creation, for either the earth was produced supernaturally, created, or it was produced naturally, that is, apart from God. Any naturalistic origin of the world would involve evolution, or it would be the result of natural laws operating on primitive matter, producing complexity over time. Thus, the concept of evolution did not begin with Darwin. Rather, it began. It has been the characteristic of every non-Christian philosophy since that of Thales in the 6th century BC.
So it's always been around. If you have any naturalistic philosophy, says you're going to have some type of evolutionary process, because you have to get from, for instance, mental to mental. You have to move that. So if you're going to do that, you have to have some type of evolutionary process. And so it's always been around. He then moves on to what he calls idolatrous atheism. He says, as he's indicated here, idolatry and atheism are not as distinct from each other or opposed to each other as they might initially appear to be. Atheism, he tells us, needs idolatry. You cannot live consistently as a relativist without some constant, absolute meaning in life. And so this is a second or third time he makes this point, right? You need something in order to live consistently, some absolute meaning in life. You just can't say, no, it's all, movements in the void or whatever. Right? No, you need something to do that. And so you can't live, he says, consistently without something like that. And so atheism needs idolatry. And he says relativists are always dogmatic about excluding non-relativist ideas. For example, when they say that people should not impose their values on others, right?
Right.
Also, though, idolatry needs atheism. The choice of worship of a false god is ultimately irrational and rebellious. And thus, most unbelievers, he says, combine these motifs in various ways. They need each other, is the point that he's making, both idolatry and atheism.
Right. How dare the Christian baker not bake a cake for gay weddings? You're imposing your belief on us. Now get in the bakery and bake us a cake. Okay, I think someone's imposing, and it seems to be the other way around. Yes, you're right.
Yeah. Who's imposing what? And
right. Exactly.
Who gets to impose, right?
Who imposes the imposers?
That's right.
Well, Christian apologetic response is the next portion here. And he says that let me, in a very general way, suggest strategies that cover a great many actual cases. So he takes on first against atheistic relativism. When you find an unbeliever who stresses the atheistic relativist side of unbelief, be persistent in asking these two questions here. How can you be sure that relativism is right when it itself rules out all assurances? So this is there are no absolutes. Are you absolutely sure? Right. That's the one we all know. Well, how can you live as a relativist is the second one. How can you live like that? Having no assurance of anything must be a terrible strain rationally, emotionally, and volitionally? What basis do you have for making decisions? What basis do you have for criticizing the treatment you receive from others? So, okay, what's true for me is not always true for you. And so this person came up to me and said, give me your wallet or I'll shoot you. Well, that's just a funny coincidence that just happened right there. And so I hope that person enjoys his new wallet. Well, no, that's not it. How dare he? This is my wallet. No, I'll not give it to you. Or please don't shoot me. Why? Well, I don't want you to. Well, I do. Well, now we're running into two opposing.
Just what we want. Yeah.
Right,
desires. Yeah. It's just a matter of desires. Right.
Good.
Yeah. So next, against idolatrous rationalism, he says, when we meet someone who tends to stress the powers rather than the limits of autonomous thought and action, you will likely be dealing with someone in the grip of an idol. Find out what his idol is and take aim by asking these questions. First, what basis is there for thinking that this idol is absolute? Also, does your God really do the job of a God? Did it create the world? Is it the ground of logic, mathematics, ethics, value, a universal judgment in science? Is it adequate as a final standing of meaning, truth, and right? Right. So, does it really do the job that that a God is supposed to do? And of course, the implication is it doesn't, and you'll be able to help the person see that.
Right. So this is the preconditionality of rationalism or of intelligibility. Can you okay, you want to be rational? Well, can you provide a system that provides you the ability to be rational? Is kind of one of the ways that you might ask that question. And so, evolution gave me the ability to survive, and rationalism is one of those ways. Okay, so there could be another creature on the other side of Jupiter that has evolved a different set of rationality. And so there's nothing wrong about that person. Well, no, it's got to be the same rationality. Okay, so evolution produced this universal physical trait that it imbued all living beings in the universe with. And so we go out and we have to operate in that way. And so you have to kind of, again, take that step back and say, okay, you want to use rationality, you want to use science. Can you provide a system by which you're allowed to do that? Can you justify the reason? Not well, it works. Well, okay, that's a might makes right approach, but you're saying, can you provide me the system in place that allows you to stand on the pedestal of science, of rationality, on your
What's
ethical
the ground
standard?
of it?
Right.
What's the foundation of it?
Right. Exactly. Well, we know that an impersonal God can do none of these things. So the unbeliever will be tempted either to lapse into relativism or to grant to God, his God, some element of personality. Well, once he does that latter, he is granting part of our case, and we can pursue him further, especially by asking him, how do you know this person? So I think rationality is one of those ones where we can say, in order to have rationality, there has to be a mind. And so, okay, well, where does this mind exist? Can you point to him? And so I can point to him. And so from there, we get onto how do you know this intelligence or this system is in place, this supercomputer that controls all things. And then you just are taking a step back and saying, okay, so did the supercomputer always exist, or have we always been in the matrix, or is there something outside the matrix that we can? Are we irrational outside the matrix, and only in here are we rational? Okay.
Right. So what we're seeing here is his what he calls these various arguments, or at least challenges or questions against atheistic relativism, against idolatrous rationalism. Finally, against atheistic idolatry. And he says, here we press a fundamental contradiction in this irrationalistic combination. A proof that there are no proofs, an absolute statement that there are no absolute statements, he says. Then we attack the original rationalistic and irrationalistic elements, as we saw above. He says it will not be easy. The unbeliever will slide from one position to another, from rationalism to irrationalism and back again. And so it says, in the end, really, argument itself will not be enough. God must intervene there. Thus, prayer, he tells us, and he ends the chapter here, prayer is the ultimate apologetic weapon. Right? And so even when we confront, he's suggesting, and we get them to kind of somewhat admit this, it still won't be enough. We still need to go to God about men before we talk to men about God, is what he's giving.
This is why with Reformed epistemology, it's not enough to just break down all the barriers. You want to provide a position in order to grab onto, the life preserver. And so that's why I think he presented the evidence or proof of the gospel earlier in this book because he wants to stress that from a biblical perspective, that's the ultimate key. We can talk about evolution and the peppered moth and the scientists gluing them on to show just how important impact the humans had at developing the peppered moth. But ultimately, it comes down to whether or not one puts their faith, which is trust, in God to not just have risen from the dead, but also to pay for their sins perfectly. And so that's what we want to drive home as the point for the ultimate message. It's not just to be contentious. It's not just to have arguments, but it's to have arguments for a purpose and for the betterment of that person as well. And so not just to add numbers to our side like zombies. We want people to live consistently and honor the Creator that created all things, and then go and be with Him with all of us, as many people as possible in the end. So that's it for chapter 9. And for chapter 10, he takes kind of a different take and wants to talk about how to talk to strangers. And so I think this might be a little bit on his tactics, maybe not Columbo, but we'll see. I don't know, Murder, She Wrote version from John Frame side of chapter 10 as when we turn back and finish up our book of Apologetics, A Justification of Christian Belief next time. Thank you, and see you next time.
See you next time.